Hello, bonjour. Welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home Growing Canadian Productivity, presented by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I am the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I'm also your host and moderator. We're thrilled to be joining you online, bringing people together across the country and beyond, live in conversation. French interpretation is available for this event. To access it, click on the globe icon or the word interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're still looking for it, click on the more, but you should see the globe icon, interpretation, and then select French. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in downtown Toronto, Ontario, Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are right now, as well as what changes can be made in an ongoing effort looking ahead, moving forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices and where I am are located within the bounds of Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We're honored at the Walrus to contribute to a tradition of storytelling, and we welcome you at home, at work, wherever you are across Canada, around the world, to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on. As part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't done so recently or if you haven't done so at all, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that recommendation came out of a discussion we had here at the Walrus Talks. So, a bit about the Walrus. The Walrus is Canada's conversation. We cover stories across Canada to offer a deeper understanding of who we are from those inside and outside the country. And this year, from tariffs to taunts of becoming a 51st state, Canada is the conversation. And the country has been standing strong. We're responding to this moment with facts, analysis, and even some humor, which is the Canadian way. You can find us online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands, or by subscribing to The Walrus. You can also listen to our podcasts and stories online and take part in events like this one. This work is independent and it's powered by our community of donors, supporters, and partners. A big thank you to Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for supporting this work. To kick off today's conversation, please welcome Ted Hewitt, President of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Hi, Ted. Over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Jennifer, for your introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm delighted to be here to support this very important panel discussion. The Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, as many of you know, is one of Canada's federal research funding agencies. Its main role is to support the social sciences and humanities research at Canada's post-secondary institutions and well beyond that informs and improves the lives of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Specifically, SSHRC-funded researchers and students deepen our understanding of people, of societies, cultures, and institutions. Their knowledge, insights, and discoveries are helping to address the most pressing domestic and global challenges we face today, from climate change and environmental issues, strengthening democracy and combating myths and disinformation, to advancing Indigenous reconciliation and strengthening our nation's economic prosperity. It's important to note that SSHRC-funded scholars do not work in silos. They recognize the value of connecting with all sectors of society in a variety of ways to ensure that the knowledge generated courtesy of public funds improves the well-being of Canadians. We're proud to sponsor today's event, bringing together key thought leaders from research, community, and beyond to advance public discourse on Canadian productivity. As you may be aware, SSHRC is moving to invest new partnership funding so researchers and their collaborators in government can further study this very topic and inform public policy aimed at addressing Canada's lagging productivity. Indeed, there is broad consensus among both academics and policymakers that Canada has a productivity problem. But addressing it is complex, partly because productivity isn't just about technology or new products and processes. At the end of the day, it's about people. Addressing the problem requires understanding of how human beings behave, how they interact, as well as examining the institutions we build, the public policies we adopt, and the cultures and workplaces we create. These are the elements that determine whether or not new ideas and discoveries will actually take root and whether they will deliver lasting benefits. That's what social sciences and humanities research brings to the table. Whether we're looking at the adoption of new technologies, the role of regulation, or the dynamics of diverse workplaces, experts in these areas, like our panelists here today, give us the insights and tools to make smarter choices and anticipate the ripple effects of change. If you'd like to dig deeper, Shirk has created a compendium of social sciences and humanities research and resources on its website that touches on the topic of productivity. The link will be shared in the Zoom chat. It's the first in a series of features on social sciences and humanities research that is generating insights on high priority issues for Canadians, such as trade, security and defense, housing, polarization, the cultural economy, as well as many others. Please follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter called Dialogue to stay informed on these and other updates. Without further ado, I'd like to thank the Walrus, for convening this vital conversation, as well as the panelists for taking the time to share their knowledge and expertise. I am very much looking forward to what I'm sure will be a fruitful, enlightening discussion, as I'm sure you are all. So thank you very much. Merci, collègue.
Thank you so much, Ted. I'm looking forward to the conversation as well. Today, we are exploring productivity. This is a popular buzzword as of late. Productivity measures how we convert work into economic output and its relationship with post-secondary institutions. Strong productivity leads to faster growth, more jobs, and higher wages, and can help protect the economy from high inflation and the shocks of a global trade war. Also, a popular conversation this year. But Canada's productivity growth has stagnated in recent years, and over the past 4 decades, it has slipped significantly. As Canada searches for strategies to boost productivity, today's speakers will explore how our world class research sector can play a part. With the Walrus Talks at home, each speaker will give their talk, one after the other live. This is then followed by a moderated Q&A session where we open it up with our talkers and you, our audience at home. So feel free to submit your questions at any point during the talks in the comment section, and I'll do my best as the moderator to get to as many as possible. Also, when you post your question, let us know where in Canada or where in the world you're joining us from. We also encourage you to share this conversation on social media. You can tag us at The Walrus and use our hashtag Walrus Talks. Today, we'll be hearing from live Trevor Tombe, Professor, Department of Economics, University of Calgary, Director, Fiscal and Economic Policy, the School of Public Policy. Tima Bansal, Canada Research Chair in Business Sustainability. Akolisa Ufodike, Associate Professor, School of Administrative Studies, York University. And Valerie Walker, CEO, Business and Higher Education Roundtable. Thank you to all of our talkers for joining us, as well as everyone tuning in and logging in. We're going to start today with Trevor. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And hello, my name is Trevor Tombe. I'm a professor of economics and director of fiscal and economic policy at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. I'm going to start with a simple but important point. Productivity isn't about working longer hours or working harder for less pay. It's about getting more done or producing more value for the time that we do put in, or getting the same done, but with less time spent. Think about a translation app on your phone. A few years ago, translating a paragraph into another language, dictionaries, or paying for professional help. And now you can do it instantly for free in your pocket. Or take a writing project where once it took hours to format references or check grammar, software now does it in seconds. And in both cases, the same hour of effort now produces much more value than before. That's productivity. And that, when you multiply it over millions of individuals and businesses, is what drives our incomes and living standards forward. In fact, the data is quite clear that when productivity rises, wages rise right alongside. Over decades, average labor compensation, adjusted for inflation, has tracked labor productivity growth almost perfectly. And so, if we want higher incomes and stronger living standards, this is where it comes from. So, how do we increase productivity? Well, there are many ways. Sometimes it's through new ideas like breakthroughs in technologies or new way of organizing work. Sometimes it's about sharing what works best and making sure that innovations spread beyond the leading firms. Education is central here. Universities and colleges themselves and researchers within them generate new knowledge, train graduates who then carry that insight into workplaces and beyond, or many starting perhaps their own businesses on their own. Universities also build partnerships that help discoveries find practical use. And post secondary institutions also drive skills development, which equips people to adapt and invent new tools. But more broadly, and beyond this particular sector, infrastructure also matters. It shrinks distances and connects people. Specialization and trade matters as well. It lets us each do what we do best and at the same time benefit from others' strengths. And then there's who participates in the economy. Canada still has untapped potential among many groups with below average labor force participation rate, for example. Indigenous peoples, new Canadians, individuals with young children have lower labor force participation rate than the population as a whole. And so expanding opportunities for everyone can strengthen the economy as a whole. This, for example, was an important consideration for the federal government when it ramped up its support for more affordable childcare a couple of years ago. So where do we stand today? Well, unfortunately, not where we'd like. Over the past decade, Canada's productivity has grown barely at all, only about 0.2% per year, which is the weakest stretch in a very long time. For the 2 decades prior to the most recent decade, for example, we'd average about 1.5% growth per year. And now, compared with our peers, we're also slipping. Our productivity level is comparable to Spain and Italy now, and our growth over the past decade lags nearly everybody else. Are complex, low investment, slow diffusion of new technology, other barriers that hold back many of our most productive firms. All open economy, we face some extra uncertainty right now from the possibility of major shifts in global trade policy, largely thanks to our neighbor to the south. But the good news is that there is renewed attention on this issue. This year, governments, federal, provincial, local, are moving on things like internal trade reforms, new major infrastructure projects, and so much more. And so these efforts, they won't turn the ship overnight, but they reflect a growing recognition that productivity is the engine of rising living standards. So, to sum it all up, productivity is not abstract. It's about the everyday ways that we create more from our time. A startup that brings a new app to market, a parent able to return to the workforce because supports are in place, a construction crew completing projects more quickly with modern equipment or streamlined rules. Multiplying these examples across millions of people, and that's what makes the difference between an economy that stagnates and one that prospers. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Hi, I'm Tima Bansal. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Business Sustainability at the Ivey Business School at Western University in London, Canada. When we talk about increasing productivity, we need innovation. Yet when we talk about innovation, we often think about the big tech, robotics, AI, digital platforms. But let's be honest, Canada cannot compete head to head with the US, China, or South Korea on big tech. These are countries with huge markets, deep capital pools, and a cultural appetite for risk. They're playing a different game, one that runs on billions of dollars and massive scale. Big tech solves some of the world's biggest problems, there's no question, but it's the very scale that creates new ones. And we can think about the energy consumed by AI data centers or algorithms that are shaping our lives and political views, and often invisibly. So I believe Canada's greatest opportunity isn't to join the big tech race, but to redefine it. We need to weave together the social and natural sciences so that our innovations serve people rather than govern them. That's a message that Ted Hewitt said at the outset. I want to make 2 points today. The first is that social sciences are essential to realizing the positive potential of technology. And the second is that this integration between the social and the technical is Canada's sweet spot on the world stage. So let me tackle the first point. We already have the technologies to tackle big social and environmental challenges. We can capture carbon, we can store renewable energy, we can design circular supply chains. The problem isn't invention, as Ted said, it's implementation. What holds us back is social acceptance, it's incentives, it's public policy, it's pricing. These aren't technological issues, they're human. Fundamentally, they're behavioral, institutional, and political. The hardest part of innovation isn't creating new things, it's getting people and systems to change the old. So my second point is that Canada's weaknesses can actually be our strengths. We have a small and very dispersed market and over a large geography. We're relatively risk averse, and we don't have the same deep venture capital pools as other countries. But what we do have are highly educated citizens, remarkable diversity and pluralism in a world that's increasingly polarized, and strong public research institutions, including SSHRC, one of today's sponsors. These are enormous assets, and they give us a unique competitive advantage that we need to leverage. We shouldn't aspire to scaling up and out like Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. We need to stop thinking about unicorns and billion-dollar valuations. Instead, we can scale deep, building place-based innovations that grow from local collaboration, become embedded in context, and spread through our networks of learning and trust. So I'm going to give you an example. I was at an event at the University of Guelph where we brought together farmers, entrepreneurs, and researchers to talk about soil health. During a coffee break, a farmer mentioned a problem he was facing. He had too much grass, and it required spraying herbicide. A researcher sitting at the same table offered to write an algorithm that could analyze his photographs and identify exactly how much herbicide was needed and where. That small conversation sparked a collaboration with immediate impact. And it was a collaboration that could be scaled up by moving from farm to farm. It wasn't a billion-dollar breakthrough, but it was small, scalable, place-based, and it would improve productivity and sustainability. That's the kind of innovation Canada can lead, grounded in relationships, solving real problems, and adaptable to context. So how do we do this systemically? First, we need to co-design technologies from the ground up. Engineers need to sit beside sociologists, anthropologists, and even management researchers together, not in separate buildings. Second, we need financing that supports growth, not just ideas. We need patient capital, funding that bridges the valley of death between prototype and commercialization. Canada's global innovations clusters are a good start, but we need more long-term blended finance that combines public purpose with private risk. Third, we need to value place-based innovation. Instead of always looking outward to Silicon Valley for validation, we should celebrate what works here. Indigenous-led clean energy microgrids in northern communities, biofuel plants in Quebec, turning waste into value, agri-tech startups in the prairies, tailoring tools to local soils and crops. These are Canada's quiet revolutions, deeply rooted and yet quietly transformative. In conclusion, if we want innovation and productivity in Canada, we need social sciences to gird technology. The real battleground is social, in adoption, in institutions, in norms, and incentives. It encourages deep scaling, not to move fast and break things. It helps to ensure that technology serves society and that Canada finds its own unique way to productivity. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Akolisa Ufodike, Associate Professor at York University. This is a tale of two Canadian economies. Canada has the lowest deficit and the lowest debt to GDP ratio amongst G7 countries. GDP is the most common measure of a country's economic output. It represents the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within a nation during a specific time. In 2000, the year I migrated to Canada, the country's nominal GDP, which is GDP not adjusted for inflation, stood at $745 billion USD. Roughly a decade later, in 2011, it had more than doubled to 1.7 trillion. And by the end of 2024, it had expanded further to $2.2 trillion. Over that same period, Canada admitted over 7 million immigrants, more than half of whom were economic or skilled migrants between the ages of 25 and 44. At the start of 2000, Canada's population was about 30 million, with a labor force of approximately 15 million. Of that, 3 million were migrants. By 2025, the population had grown to 40 million, with a workforce of 21 million, including 5 million immigrants. This represents an increase in the immigrant share of the workforce from 20% to 25%. Also, this meant that while non-immigrant workforce grew by 25%, the immigrant workforce grew by almost 70%. In Alberta, for example, immigrants filled roughly 80% of all new jobs created between 2018 and 2022, underscoring the critical role immigration continues to play in sustaining Canada's labor market and economic growth. So put differently, virtually all of Canada's absolute economic growth was driven by immigration, because GDP grows every time an employer hires a new worker to produce more goods or services. Failing to hire in spite of increased demand would result in economic stagnation or worse still, contraction. The 1999 federal budget was based on total revenues of $176 billion in revenues and expenditures of $162 billion. By 2023, revenues had risen to $460 billion with expenditures of $433 billion. Government spending underpins the very essence of our Canadian identity. It funds universal healthcare, education, and social programs like the Canada Pension Plan and old age security. These programs are what distinguish us from other countries, such as the United States. Canada's steady GDP growth has been fueled primarily by immigration, enabling us to sustain these defining social programs. Now, that's the good news. The bad news lies in a less celebrated economic metric, productivity, which measures the value each worker generates per hour worked. So, for instance, two bakers might produce the same product, bread, but one makes more loaves per hour. Alternatively, a baker and a physician both produce valuable services, but a physician's hourly output carries higher economic value. So in short, while immigration has expanded Canada's workforce and GDP, productivity growth has lagged, raising important questions about the efficiency and the sustainability of Canada's economic model. As of Q1 of this year, labor productivity, which measures how much the economy produces per hour of work, had declined in 9 of the last 10 quarters. Between 2015 and 2023, Canadian productivity fell by an average of 0.8% per year. What that means is that output per hour decreased by nearly 8% over the same period. Over the past 5 years alone, Canada's business productivity fell by 0.6%. That's compared with a 10% gain in the United States. So while these challenges are not uniquely Canadian, as across the OECD, productivity growth has slowed over the last several decades. And that's in parallel with a deceleration in human capital growth. An OECD report found that despite all the technological gains of the past 50 years, OECD countries are actually producing less in value, in dollars, in goods per hour than in the 70s. In our case here in Canada, we face additional demographic headwinds. Last week, Global News reported that fertility rates fell to a record low of 1.25 births per woman, down from the previous low set in 2022. RBC has warned of a looming silver tsunami, as all baby boomers will reach retirement age by 2030, with profound implications for the labor force. At the same time as the boomers are retiring and their rights to the Canadian pension plan are crystallizing, Canada's human capital indicators are weakening, particularly in STEM performance. The OECD has a measure called the Program for International Student Assessments, PISA, which is a widely recognized measure of human capital. It evaluates both the quality and the quantity of education by testing how well 15-year-olds can apply their knowledge to real-world challenges in mathematics, reading, and science. In the 2022 assessment, Canada ranked 6th in reading, 9th in mathematics, and 7th in science. Yet performance in both math and reading had declined compared to 2018, revealing a troubling downward trend in just 5 years. When it comes to the quantity of education, Canada appears strong at first glance. 57% of Canadians aged 25 to 64 hold a post-secondary credential, and this is the highest rate in the G7. However, this figure is also significantly buoyed by immigration. And that's because Canada's express entry system selects economic immigrants with high levels of education. More than 71% of economic class immigrants hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and that's compared to 27% of Canadian-born citizens. Among all immigrants admitted between 2011 and 2021, 56% held a degree, and that was up from 40% in the prior decade, showing that Canada is actually admitting even more qualified newcomers, though often without fully utilizing their skills. By contrast, only 27% of third-generation or higher Canadians hold a first degree. Yet, the human capital advantage of immigration erodes within one generation. Amongst the 1.5 generation, these are immigrants who arrived as children. Only 43% earn a degree versus 56% for their parents, and this drops further to 39% among second-generation Canadians. Now, while this remains above the 27% Canadian average, it reflects a structural erosion of educational attainment over time. This undermines the simplistic narrative that immigrants are unproductive. Granted, Canada's population growth is almost entirely immigration-driven. In today's post-DEI climate, it has become fashionable to blame immigrants for productivity stagnation, housing shortages, and even healthcare pressures. In reality, these are policy failures over years crystallizing. Housing construction is constrained by municipal red tape, not immigration. In fact, immigrant labor has become essential to the construction sector, supplying workers that the industry has been unable to source locally. Similarly, healthcare shortages are worsened by professional gatekeeping. Canada, with a population of 41 million, has only 17 medical schools. Now, that's nearly the same number as New York City, which has 18, despite a population of just 8.5 million. Provincial licensing regimes further slow the integration of internationally trained doctors. Some provinces continue to recognize the opportunity. Last year in Alberta, for example, the province licensed more international medical graduates than Canadian-trained graduates. By failing to recognize and integrate immigrant qualifications, Canada is suppressing its own productivity. The often cited Canadian experience is one example. It effectively legalizes discrimination, something US employers would never openly demand. Professional associations in engineering, law, and medicine maintain exclusionary regimes that privilege reciprocal agreements with the old Commonwealth, while dismissing equally rigorous training programs from countries like India, Nigeria, and China, for example. Notably, Nigerian immigrants make up just 0.15% of the US population, but they account for over 2% of physicians. That's a 15-fold representation. For Indians, it's 5-fold. For the Chinese immigrants, it's 3-fold. These figures underscore the irony that countries like the US have figured out how to benefit disproportionately from immigrant talent, while Canada continues to sideline similarly qualified professionals. And that's just squanders a potential source of productivity growth. Immigration has not caused Canada's productivity problems. It has, in fact, kept the system from collapse. The real challenge is whether Canada can modernize equity in employment, wages and opportunities, credential recognition, labor market structures, and professional licensing to fully harness the talent it already admits. Until then, blaming immigrants is not only intellectually lazy, it's actually unproductive. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Val Walker, and I'm the CEO at the Business and Higher Education Roundtable, or BHER. I'm taking the productivity question from a simple angle. When businesses and post-secondary institutions partner on work-integrated learning, or WIL, think co-ops or internships, and upskilling, productivity goes up. That's my thesis. A quick word on BHER first. We're the only national cross-sector table where businesses and post-secondary leaders work together on talent, skills, innovation, and productivity. And we don't just publish papers, we build and deliver programs. We do this with federal support. With their support, we've created over 100 partnerships and helped to deliver more than 70,000 WIL experiences for students. We've grown an employer network of over 12,000 companies across the country. So we've seen what works on the ground. And here's why what that work matters. Canada's post-secondary systems can be productivity engines. They build talent, they generate research, and they anchor innovation corridors like the one between Toronto and Waterloo. But only if education and the economy are lined up. When they aren't, we get missed opportunities, slower growth, and talent moving away. So what's in the way? First, a skills mismatch. Employers need a mix of tech skills, like AI or data skills, and human skills, communication, teamwork, problem solving. But students don't always know how to explain the skills they have to employers or how their program maps to real jobs. There are skills silos. During school, we still sort people into programs, STEM versus arts versus business, whereas most jobs need a blend of all of those things. And AI makes that even more true. There's the underutilization of international students. We need the talent, but too many international students land in programs that don't lead to strong jobs. So they struggle to stay and work in Canada. There's also an underuse of our graduate talent. We need more people with advanced degrees, but we need to train them for the private sector because that's where most of them will end up. And finally, we know Canadian companies have long underinvested in on-the-job training, what we call upskilling or reskilling today. And I'm going to suggest there are two ways that we can move the needle. One, more WIL for students. WIL is learning with real work baked in. Co-ops and internships for sure, but also shorter projects, micro consulting, hackathons, or case competitions. And it matters because students learn how work works. Employers get early access to talent. In our program data, our outcomes are that 2/3 of our employers report a productivity boost as a result of working with a student. The problem is not enough students are getting a WIL experience before they graduate. And WIL for graduate students is a big part of the problem too. As for the solution as we see it, we need to expand flexible types of WIL for students and for companies. We need to make it easy for a small firm, for example, to post a 3-week challenge, and for a humanities or a graduate student to jump in with a solution. Second, we need better upskilling for people who already are on the job. Tech is moving fast, roles are shifting. Upskilling helps workers adapt and helps companies keep the experienced people who know their business. The solution here, build continuing ed programming that industry can plug into, create more micro credentials and other on-ramps to education for mid-career adults. And as a bonus, this is also a smart revenue stream for institutions when it's built with employers. So I want to give you a sense of what some of these partnerships actually look like. They're a college course where a local company brings a live problem and students deliver solutions in 4 weeks. It's a university lab pairing graduate students with small or medium-sized companies for a micro consulting project on data or AI questions that they do in 6-week sprints, not 6-month placements. Or it's an employer consortium funding micro credentials that stack towards certificates, taught evenings and online, so workers can actually do them. In terms of the payoff, if we can do this at scale, we get faster school to work transitions for new grads. We get higher adoption of tech and new ideas inside companies. We get more pathways for international and graduate students to stay and work in Canada. And the big one for this conversation today, we get productivity growth from better use of human capital that we already have. That's the core idea. Partner differently, learn differently, and deploy our incredible people faster. Thank you. And now I'll hand it off to Jen.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our talkers, Trevor Tombe, Tima Bansal, Akolisa Ufodike, and Valerie Walker. All right, we are excited to open up this conversation and get into it. We want to know where you are joining us from today. You'll see that a poll has just popped up. Let us know. Okay, we have audience members registered from all over, starting in Canada. Hello to Cambridge, Ottawa, Laval, Bridgewater, Brockville, Edmonton, Regina, Lethbridge, Fort Good Hope, and West Vancouver. And we also have people tuning in from around the world as well. Hello to New York, Pennsylvania, and Vermont in the United States. As well, bonjour to Marseille, France, and hello to Morocco. Okay. A reminder, if you have a question for the Q&A portion, I'm going to do my best to get to as many as possible. Just put it in the Zoom chat. And now I'm going to welcome back our talkers for the Q&A session. Just turn on your video and we will get into this part of the conversation. Okay, there we go. Akolisa, we'll get you back on camera as well. Excellent. Scott says in chat, and this is from my opening, if productivity is a buzzword, then so are things like math and reading. And I want to bring this up because I like this point and I agree, Scott. But sometimes we hear these words more than normal. And I will say, as someone who works in media, I'm hearing productivity a lot lately in media, but also on panels, in cafes. But yes, at times, other things like math and reading fundamentals, if you will, also could become buzzwords. I'd like to start with a question for Tima. Tima, you spoke a lot about innovation. And in Canada, we often compare ourselves to the US when innovation is concerned. You highlighted some examples in your talk. So, what makes the Canadian approach to innovation different than our neighbors? Is there something that's just, more Canadian about the way we approach innovation?
It's easier to talk about how the US approaches innovation. And I think that they have deep pockets,
Mm.
big pools of capital. And so they often invest in unicorns that will have major growth opportunities. And so I think the innovation often tends to be technology based. And when you look at technology based innovations, they often have platforms. And on platforms, you can sort of have these multiple scale events. The difficulty in Canada is that we don't have that same opportunity to build on these platforms. And so I think that that's why in Canada, if we do place-based contextualized innovation, that's unique to the place, but that scales deep. And so if you can imagine that we're really in a big country and yet very, very locally specific. So we started to build innovations that aren't based on these platform technologies as in Silicon Valley, but that we base it in Canada and Montreal and London, Ontario, that those tend to be deeper yet they're still relevant. And I want to make one point that's really important is that it's not just about innovation, but innovation when it leads to productivity. We have to make sure that that productivity growth isn't just about scaling up and building more revenue, gaining more revenue for one organization. The way that we can scale when we scale deep is that we build greater resilience for the community. So it's very different in Canada, and that's something we should embrace. So let's not compare numbers with the US. Let's say that what we're going to do is build a stronger, resilient Canada with place-based innovation.
That's the culture piece. Thank you for that. Valerie, I'm going to direct this question your way. Ed asks, can you comment on today's generation of business executives and managers who are supposed to scale, diffuse, invent, adopt, and strategize for innovation and productivity? This is not policy work, Ed writes. This is management work. Do our executives fail to make the necessary decisions that lead to productivity? I'd be curious your thoughts and maybe even how that relates to skills development and training.
Well, I would agree with Ed, first of all, that we put a lot on managers these days and executives at a big company. You have many layers of management, and even within the executive ranks, many levels. It's a lot to ask of them to be thinking about and reading the horizon for those early signals about what new tech might be out there. They also have to manage internal company policies for AI, for example. Are we able to use AI? How do we use it? How do I have the skills to use it appropriately? Do I have the ability to teach or the resources to provide training for those who report to me on that? And that's just one of the recent examples of a tech adoption. So I would say from our experience, especially working with companies, large companies across the country, the top level of executives, they get it. They get the opportunity and they get the need to not just introduce tech, whether it's AI or something else, without introducing the training. However, the degree to which that getting it has integrated into the companies in a systemic way with the appropriate processes also built in varies significantly. And I would argue, especially as the companies decrease in size, their internal capacity to do that as well as they could um, decreases as well. My final point, though, and this is where I would say look to the post-secondary system for help on that front. You don't need to do those things on your own. There are experts who can provide, unlike the misnomer out there, bespoke training on a pretty quick turnaround that allows us to tap into the expertise of a business school or the continuing ed departments of these publicly funded institutions to help those executives on whom we are putting a lot these days.
Valerie, you'll appreciate this. In the late 90s, one of my first jobs out of university was at Sony Music Canada in what was then called the new media department, just ahead of the rise of Napster. And the executives used to talk about, like, she gets it, he gets it a lot. And it was funny. One of the employees got on stage and said, so what's the it? Because it keeps changing. And I still think of that today because once you do get it, then the it is something new, whether it's generative AI or whatever it will become. The next question, Akolisa. Oh, yeah, please jump in,
If I
Trevor.
can just
Yeah,
jump in with a very,
yeah.
very quick point on this. Incentives do matter for how corporations operate and what decisions managers take, or even what corporations and managers exist and rise up to the top of a sector. And in some areas of Canada's economy, there's a great deal of corporate concentration or a lack of competition be the spur that leads to adopting new processes, new products, and so on. And so I think that's an area where policymakers do indeed play a role, increasing the amount of competition for those managers and firms to have incentives to innovate, to start a new business, and to have higher growth and higher productivity. And I guess I'll just plug a book if anyone's looking for it called The Big Fix from Denise Hearn and Vas Bednar, who is kind of dives into this very question.
Yeah, Vast is a contributor to the Walrus, so great plug there. Akolisa, this is from Al Bors, who's based in LA via Toronto, who asks, what are the correlations between productivity, cost of living, and reproductive rates? And how can we realign our society and or use technology to address those work-life issues moving forward? And Akolisa, I send this your way because a lot of those issues also overlap with immigration and what you were speaking to.
Right. Well, so here's the relationship, right? As nations have become more productive, there's been a decline in birth rates because you have families that working couples. So there's a relationship between increase in productivity through the 60s and the 70s and a decline in birth rates, right? So when you look at the G7 countries and the wealthier numbers of the OECD, that is a common trend. It's not uniquely Canadian. Now, what countries have done, and I'll use the United States, what some countries have done well is to supplement that those declining birth rates through immigration. But then you might be able to attract immigrants who have the right human capital for your workforce needs. The question is how easy you're making it for them to attach to the workforce. And by easy, I do not mean lowering the standards. I mean making it equitable, so that people can obviously come and put the skills that they've put to work in their previous countries to work here in Canada. The anecdotal example I like to use is when you think of the hurdles with licensing, a professional engineer here in Canada. But at the same time, as Canadians, we travel to Mexico quite a bit. We're driving on the same highways and on the same bridges that were built by Mexican engineers in those jurisdictions. But the hurdles for a Mexican licensed professional engineer to get credentialed in Canada is by far higher than it is in countries like the United States. So I don't use the United States as a best-in-class comparator, but I use it as a country with similar challenges that has figured out ways to actually put their skilled immigrants to work in a way that's helped buoy their productivity.
Thank you so much. Trevor, there's a question for you here. This is from Charles, who writes, I'm confused by what Trevor means that wages have tracked with productivity growth. I thought data shows that wages have stagnated while CEO pay and the assets of the wealthiest have ballooned. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a very important question to dig into because there's lots of different measures of productivity. There's also different measures of wages. Are we talking about average wages, or are we talking about median wages? Are we talking about wages of employees, like hourly, versus those that also include measures of salaries? And so there are different data that speak to different experiences within the labor force. There's also different measures of productivity, from labor productivity to total factor productivity, and a lot more complicated ones from there. And so what I was referring to was labor productivity specifically, the amount of, or the size of Canada's economy per hour worked, so GDP per hour. And then comparing that to some data that Statistics Canada puts out very regularly on inflation-adjusted hourly labor compensation, which includes both the wages, but also some of the benefits that just a pure wage series. So when your employer provides you with covers different dental plans, for example, that counts towards this measure of labor compensation. So not all of these measures track each other perfectly. And so the ones I'm quoting there, I think, are the broadest measures. It gives us a good sense overall of how productivity relates to compensation paid to workers, although that's not to say that everyone across the board experiences it in the same way. There's certainly those who have much larger gains and others who have smaller.
Now I have a question, Tima. I'm going to send it over to you. Scott asks if you can comment on the impact of our larger small to medium-sized enterprise sector relative to other countries has on relative productivity growth.
Oh, wow. I wish I could answer that, Jen, but I don't know the answer of how our larger, small SMEs are doing relative to other countries in terms of productivity. So I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have that handy? I don't know if anyone else can speak to that.
So maybe I'll jump in. If you look across sectors, it's construction and transportation and warehousing that kind of stand out as having the lowest productivity performance over the past decade, actually shrinking on average each by about 1.5% per year. And to the extent that transportation and warehousing includes both smaller, say, individuals who have a truck transportation services business, or larger ones like the rail companies that we have, or construction firms are also big and small. And so I think the relevant split here in terms of what's driving the slowdown in Canada is not large versus small, but sectors. Some doing kind of better than their historic average, but many doing worse.
Valerie, Kathleen asks about nonprofits. The Walrus is a nonprofit and registered charity, and I know we have people tuning in not just from the corporate sector, also a mix of people. I know we have a lot of academics, researchers. Nonprofits can be economic powerhouses when funded properly and have innovative approaches. How can they be included in helping increase productivity?
Oh man, that's a great question, and it's a pretty big one.
We got the big questions. Our audience likes the big questions and the big ideas.
There are economists on this panel who probably have better data and more recent data than I do. Um, as of about 10 or 15 years ago, the pie for Canada's GDP, there's about 12% that's driven then by the not-for-profit sector. And so I agree completely. There's a big opportunity for them to contribute. I I honestly think, I mean, in part, it depends on the not-for-profit. That's a big, generic basket to put organized into, but they have the ability to move between spaces. Public sector work is pretty clearly defined around, depending on what department you're in, what your public good is that you're trying to achieve. Similarly, you can be in different industry sectors, but in the private sector, you have a clear role. Publicly traded, you're trying to maximize quarterly returns to shareholders, you have a clear role. The not-for-profit and charitable space absolutely provide that. Tima spoke to this Canada's like the social cohesion, the social capital, whatever term you like. There's a huge opportunity there. Um, and it still, what we look at BHER in terms of what drives productivity writ large, maybe not based on the exact right academic definition. It comes down to people and ideas. And so whether you look at people and making sure that whoever they are have the right training to be the most productive and awesome in their job, or how to get good ideas either into organizations, whether that's public or private sector or not for profits, or those ideas out of the amazing institutions we have into the world to create a new process, to drive a new company, what have you. Those are the things where I think there's a lot of opportunity for the not-for-profit sector to really dig in and help make it a bit easier for the other sectors to really optimize, if not maximize, their productivity.
Thank you so much. We're almost at time, but I have a question that I'd like us to end on. So, if each of our speakers could give like a one sentence answer, and it's such a great question. Brian asks, expectations are very high for our prime minister given his background in economics and the private sector. If the prime minister asked you for key actionable policies, what would you advise him to focus on right now? So, if you could each just throw out kind of like one idea or recommendation for the prime minister, it can be from your talk or something that you'd like to end with. And if you don't mind, Tima, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, if I could speak to the Prime Minister about what policy I would recommend, I think that we need capital. We need government capital that would incent private capital to crowd in to fund for the long term Canada's sustained innovations. And so these aren't just initial rounds of funding. We're talking about continuous funding that can really grow place-based innovation with private and public partnerships.
Excellent. Trevor, what do you got for the PM?
Well, I think I might have it easy because what I'm going to recommend has been a focus of a lot of attention this year, and that's internal trade. Canada's centralized countries in the world. Provinces have a great deal of responsibility, including regulatory authority over lots of different sectors, over lots of different occupations. And this can create some frictions for businesses and individuals trying to buy and sell across borders or move across borders. And that does detract from Canada's overall productivity and the efforts that we've seen for the past many months led federally, led also by Ontario and Nova Scotia and many other provinces to ease some of those barriers, can deliver long run gains, but there's a lot left to do. And so I would say to keep the momentum going and not just stop with some of the early wins that we've seen this year.
Okay, thank you. And we want to get to our final two talkers. Briefly, Akolisa, what would your recommendation be for Prime Minister Carney?
Revisit the proportion of Canadian immigrants that are economic. We need more economic immigrants to help drive productivity. So the people, I'll say the right mix of people. And the second, I'll throw in a second one, would be to recognize that you can't just incentivize just corporations to deal with the productivity challenges Canada faces. There's got to be ways to incentivize the workers, individuals as well, to increase their output.
Good point. And Valerie, final word, recommendation for the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, if you are watching this, you need to recognize the incredible value that Canadian post-secondary institutions have in this country and help them get every student some experience in the world of work before they graduate to help them transition to be productive and fulfilled members of society earlier.
Excellent. Well, thank you all to our talkers. We've reached the end of our Q&A session. As our speakers turn off their cameras and, of course, go back to being productive workers, I'd like to thank them one more time. Thank you, Trevor, Tombe, Tina, Bansal, Akolisa, Ufodike, and Valerie Walker. To our audience, wow, chat was alive. Thank you for all of your comments, reflections, and questions. If you enjoyed today's online event, we have more coming up. On Tuesday, October 28th, join us in Toronto or online for the Walrus Talks Sovereign Canada. So we'll be building on this conversation. 7 speakers, 7 minutes each. We'll be exploring the past, present, and future of Canada's sovereignty in a changing world. And if you would like to hear more about innovation in Canada, join us on Wednesday, November 26th in Ottawa or online like this for the Walrus Talks Innovation Nation. This is sponsored by Universities Canada. Again, we just heard about the role of post-secondary institutions. This second event in the Walrus's Productivity Series will explore the university-led research, transforming ideas into tangible solutions that are fueling our economy, improving our well-being, and elevating Canada's global leadership. Keep an eye on your inbox. You will receive a follow-up email. And the best way to stay in touch with the Walrus and attend future events like this one is to opt in and sign up for our free newsletter in that email. We also have recorded this event, so the video will be posted. You can check in at thewalrus.ca/events to watch videos from all of our events in the Walrus Talks video room on our website. As mentioned, the Walrus is a nonprofit newsroom. We're a registered charity powered by people like you. So if you believe this moment we're in calls for deep, rigorous, clear-eyed reporting, consider making a donation today. It's one thing you can do to help Canada stay strong with free for all reporting. Donate to the Walrus at thewalrus.ca/support to ensure we can continue this work, including free events like this one. Thank you again to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for their generous support, their work, and partnership. Thank you as well to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC, and Rogers. And thank you all for tuning in. Have a great afternoon, day ahead, depending where you're joining us from.